Long ago, in a small village near the mountains, there lived a brave hunter named Richard. He was known for his sharp aim, fearless heart, and love for the forest. Richard often brought back deer, rabbits, and wild birds, which helped feed the people of his village. Everyone respected him, and many young men wished to be like him. One cold winter morning, Richard prepared for his biggest hunt. He told the villagers he would travel deep into the dark forest, farther than anyone had ever gone before. He wanted to prove that no place was too dangerous for him. Some villagers begged him not to go. They whispered about strange voices in the woods, glowing eyes in the night, and shadows that followed hunters until they vanished. The elders warned him, saying the forest was cursed. But Richard only laughed and said, "I will return with the biggest hunt of my life." Days passed, then weeks, but Richard never returned. His family searched for him, and many hunters tried to follow his trail. They found his footprints leading deep into the trees, but the tracks ended suddenly as if he had disappeared into the ground. No one found his bow, his arrows, or even his body. It was as though the forest had swallowed him whole. After that day, strange things began to happen. Some villagers claimed they heard Richard's voice calling their names from the forest. Others swore they saw a tall shadow standing between the trees at night, holding a bough with glowing eyes. Fear spread quickly, and soon no one dared to enter the forest after sunset. From then on, parents told their children the same warning: do not go into the cursed forest, or Richard the hunter will take you, just as the forest took him. The legend of Richard became a story passed down through generations, and the people began calling him the hunter who never returned. Many years after Richard disappeared, his story had turned into a legend. Most villagers feared the forest and stayed away. But not everyone believed the warnings. Some young men thought the tale of Richard was only an old story made to scare children. Among them were 3 hunters, Liam, Jacob, and Daniel. They were strong, fearless, and proud. They laughed at the old people who spoke of curses and shadows. To them, Richard was not a ghost, but a man who probably got lost, injured, or attacked by a wild animal. They told each other that they would go into the forest, return safely, and prove to everyone that the legend was false. One evening, the 3 friends sat together in Liam's house, making their plan. The room was filled with the smell of burning firewood, and outside, the cold wind howled against the walls. Liam spread out a map on the wooden table. "We will go at dawn," Liam said with confidence. "We will take the northern path into the forest. If Richard really disappeared there, we will find some sign of him." Jacob sharpened his hunting knife, smiling. "And when we come back, the whole village will call us braver than Richard himself." Daniel, however, stayed quiet. He had heard his grandmother speak about the forest many times. Her stories of glowing eyes and whispers still echoed in his head. But he did not want to look weak in front of his friends, so he nodded and agreed to go. By midnight, they had gathered their supplies: bows, knives, ropes, and torches. They packed food and water, enough for several days. Their hearts were full of pride, not fear. As the village slept, the 3 hunters dreamed of glory. They believed they would uncover the truth about Richard and finally put an end to the story of the hunter who never returned. But what they did not know was that the forest had been waiting for them. The morning came cold and gray. A thick mist covered the mountains, and the air carried the smell of wet earth. Liam, Jacob, and Daniel left the safety of the village with their weapons on their backs and hope in their hearts. Some villagers stood at their doors, watching in silence. No one dared to stop them, but many whispered prayers, for they knew the forest was not a place to challenge. The path began clear and easy, lined with tall pines and soft grass. Birds sang, and sunlight slipped through the branches. For a while, The hunters laughed and joked, feeling no fear. They told themselves the stories of Richard were nothing but lies. But as they walked deeper, the forest began to change. The trees grew taller and thicker, blocking the light. The songs of the birds faded until there was only silence. Even the sound of their own footsteps seemed too loud, echoing strangely through the still air. By midday, the mist returned, floating low around their legs. The forest smelled damp and old, as though it had not been touched by life for many years. Daniel paused and whispered, "Do you feel it?" As if someone is watching us. Liam waved him off. "It's only your nerves. Stay focused." But even Liam, though proud, felt unease crawling up his spine. Jacob suddenly stopped. He pointed to the ground. There, between the roots of an old tree, lay a single broken arrow, old, dark, and half-buried in dirt. It looked as if it had been there for years. The hunters stared in silence. Could it have belonged to Richard? The deeper they went, the stranger the forest became. The trees bent in odd shapes, and shadows moved where no wind blew. A faint sound, like footsteps, followed them, though no one else was there. The cursed forest had welcomed them at last. And it was not a welcome of peace. Night fell quickly inside the cursed forest. The hunters built a small fire near a circle of trees and set up their camp. The flames gave a little comfort, but the darkness beyond the light seemed endless. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. They sat close together, speaking in low voices. Liam tried to keep everyone's courage strong. "Tomorrow we will go deeper. We are close to finding the truth," he said firmly. Jacob laughed loudly, trying to hide his fear. Daniel, however, kept glancing into the shadows, uneasy with every flicker of light. As the fire burned low, they decided to rest. Each man lay down near the flames, their weapons within reach. Hours passed in silence. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, a faint sound came, soft footsteps circling the camp. Daniel opened his eyes, heart racing. He thought he saw a tall shadow standing between the trees, but when he blinked, it was gone. He turned to wake Jacob, but Jacob was not there. His bedroll was empty. Panic filled the camp. Liam and Daniel grabbed their torches and shouted his name. "Jacob, Jacob, where are you?" Their voices echoed strangely, as though the forest was mocking them. No answer came. Then Daniel froze. His torchlight caught something on a nearby tree. Sticking deep into the bark was Jacob's hunting knife. The blade was wet, shining red in the firelight as if it had just been used. But there was no sign of Jacob himself. The forest grew silent again, almost too silent. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the pounding of their own hearts. Liam tried to stay calm, but his face was pale. "Something took him," Daniel whispered, his voice shaking. "The forest took him, just like it took Richard." The legend was no longer just a story. It was happening again. Liam and Daniel did not sleep after Jacob vanished. They sat by the fire with their weapons ready, their eyes fixed on the darkness. The forest was too quiet. Not even an insect chirped. It felt as though the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting. Hours dragged on. Then, a soft whisper floated through the mist. At first it was distant, almost like the wind. But slowly, the sound grew clearer. Both men froze when they heard the voice. It was Jacob's voice. "Liam." "Daniel." It called, weak and broken, as if Jacob was hurt and needed help. Daniel stood, his hands shaking. "It's him. He's alive," he cried, ready to run into the trees. But Liam grabbed his arm. His face was pale. "No, that's not Jacob," he whispered. "Listen carefully." The voice came again, but this time it was different. It sounded older, heavier, filled with sorrow. And then Liam recognized it. It was the voice of Richard, the hunter who never returned. The mist shifted, and between the trees, a tall shadow appeared. The figure was long and thin, with glowing eyes that burned like fire. In its hand, it carried a bow, and on its back, a quiver of arrows. The shadow moved slowly, stepping closer, but its feet made no sound on the ground. Daniel's torchlight shook as he raised it. The figure leaned forward, and for a brief moment, they saw its face, or what remained of it. The skin was pale, stretched thin, and the mouth hung open in an endless whisper. "Join me," the shadow hissed. "Hunt with me." The hunters felt cold seep into their bones. Daniel dropped his torch in fear, and darkness swallowed half the camp. Liam dragged him back toward the fire, but both knew the truth. They were not alone. Richard had returned, but not as a man. Liam and Daniel knew they could not stay in the forest any longer. The shadow of Richard was no longer a story told by old villagers. It was real, and it wanted them. As soon as the first light of dawn touched the sky, they packed their things quickly and began their escape. But the forest would not let them go. Every path they took bent back into itself. They walked for hours only to find themselves standing again at the same broken tree where Jacob's knife had been found. The forest was twisting around them like a maze, trapping them inside. "Something is playing with us," Daniel whispered, fear thick in his voice. The mist grew heavier. Branches stretched out like hands, and the sound of footsteps followed them wherever they went. Then, from the fog, an arrow shot past Daniel's head, burying itself into a tree. The hunters froze. Another arrow followed, this one landing at Liam's feet. The arrows were old, black, and cracked, but their edges were sharp enough to kill. Liam raised his torch, shouting, "Show yourself." The shadow stepped out from between the trees. Richard's glowing eyes pierced through the mist. His bow was raised, an arrow pulled back, aimed at Daniel. But it was not a man holding it, it was a spirit bound to the forest, a hunter who would never stop hunting. Liam grabbed Daniel and pulled him behind a rock as the arrow flew past. "Run," he shouted. They tried to fight their way through, swinging their torches and knives. But the shadow moved faster than any man. Every time the torchlight touched it, the figure flickered, then reappeared somewhere else. It was as if the forest itself was helping him. One by one, the torches began to die. Daniel screamed as the shadow dragged him into the mist, his cries echoing before fading into silence. Liam stood alone, his last torch burning weakly. He knew the forest was closing in. He could not fight forever. The hunt had begun, and he was the final prey. By the second night, the village noticed something was wrong. Liam, Jacob, and Daniel had promised to return within a day, yet no one saw them again. Families waited at their doors, staring at the dark forest, praying to hear footsteps. But the hunters never came back. Days turned into weeks. A small group of villagers tried to search for them. They walked as far as they could without losing their way, but the forest pushed them back. The only things they found were strange remains, an old torch burned black, a broken bowstring, and footprints that stopped suddenly in the mud. There were no signs of life. It was as if the forest had swallowed the hunters whole, just as it had swallowed Richard long ago. Whispers spread quickly. Some claimed they heard Daniel's cries in the night, carried on the wind. Others swore they saw Liam's shadow at the edge of the trees, holding a flickering torch that never went out. A few even believed Jacob's laughter still echoed deep inside, but twisted, not human anymore. The elders shook their heads in sorrow. "The forest has claimed them," they said. "Just as it claimed Richard. They are now part of the curse." From that time on, the legend grew darker. People said the hunters' souls joined Richard in the eternal hunt. Together, they roamed the cursed forest, looking for anyone foolish enough to enter. Their glowing eyes could be seen between the trees, and their whispers could be heard in the mist. Parents warned their children more strongly than ever, never step into the cursed forest. Do not follow the voices. Do not chase the shadows. For Richard and the others are still hunting, and they are waiting for you. The story of Richard was no longer just one man's tragedy. It had become an endless legend. And the forest remained silent and watchful, guarding the hunters who never returned. So now, the villagers say the forest is alive with the spirits of hunters who never returned. And if you ever walk too close, you might hear Richard's voice calling your name from the mist. Did you feel the chill? Eyes. If you want more terrifying legends and dark tales like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next horror story. Thank you for watching, and remember, some hunters never return.